Welcome to Success Story, the most useful podcast in the world. I'm your host, Scott D. Clary, and today you're going to hear me on the Cyber Security Matters podcast. The Cyber Security Matters podcast is hosted by Dominic Vogel and Christian Redshaw. They speak about all things business, tech, and of course, cybersecurity. They brought me onto the show. I was fortunate enough to have a chance to sit down with them. We spoke about leadership, why it's important for leaders to show empathy and what true leadership is. We spoke about content. We spoke about predictable revenue, just a great variety of topics for any small business owner or any entrepreneur or solopreneur. So this is me on the Cybersecurity Matters podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another epic edition of the Cybersecurity Matters podcast. I'm your co-host, Dominic Vogel, and joining me, as always, is my friend in crime, Christian Redshaw. Christian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. How are you, Dominic?
I am doing well. I am missing seeing you, and I look forward to seeing you at some point very, very soon this summer, as well as our lovely production crew as well. But rather than just pining for familiar faces, who is our special guest tonight?
Well, we have Scott Cleary, and he is a sales and marketing executive from Ontario, Canada, but based, I believe, in Florida at the moment. He also is a podcast host as well, and the podcast is called the Success Story Podcast, which I have listened to on multiple occasions, and it's very good. So I expect great things from Scott today.
Awesome. Well, he's a fantastic individual. We'll take a pause here. We'll bring Scott in, and let's have an epic combo with him. Stay tuned.
Let's do it. Scott, all the way from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, welcome to the Cybersecurity Matters podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's great to finally have you on here. So my first question here, you have some marketing and sales focus. You've got a lot of interest going on here, but you also have your podcast, which is called the Success Story Podcast. So let's start with that. Just quickly tell us what that podcast is, and then I've got a follow-up question for you.
Yeah, sure. That's very kind of you to plug the podcast. Podcast first started out discussing things that I do in my career. So interviewing sales and marketing leaders. It's sort of grown a little bit since then. And the way that I draw a parallel from people in the podcast universe, I try and put out content that's Tim Ferriss, but more of a business focus. So I bring in people that can speak about how to, be the most productive you can be, accelerate your professional or your personal life, but also bring in sales and marketing leaders, entrepreneurs, CXOs, and discuss like very tactical business strategies that somebody who is starting a side hustle or somebody who is building their own business, or somebody that is a term that I like to use, entrepreneur, somebody who is very motivated within their own company, can also gain some insights from the show and apply it to, whatever organization they're a part of. So that's the core takeaway from the podcast. That's what I try and get across.
I love it. And, I have often wished that Tim Ferriss would be more of a business focus consistently in his podcast. So you're definitely scratching my itch there. I'd rather that he talk less about psychedelics and mushrooms and other weird stuff. doesn't really hit me.
Guess, but yeah, I hear you. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for filling that gap for me. So my question then, because I've been able to listen to and enjoy a few episodes of the podcast in the past, what has been the biggest, let's say, turnaround story that you have been able to see where, one of your guests has had this crazy background with these insurmountable odds and have been able to overcome and turn their life into a success story? Is there one that stands out for you in particular that you can share with us?
I'll answer that question first with a high level takeaway that I've started to understand after speaking to all these individuals that have quote unquote success stories. It could be, and by the way, the definition of success can be in the traditional sense where they've built a big business or they have a great career, or it could just be something in line with they've built something themselves, and that allows them freedom, that allows them to spend more time with their family or whatever. So that's the definition, or several definitions of success that I like to run with. But the main takeaway that I get from many of the people that I speak to is that they all have significantly difficult stories, obstacles that have stopped them, major failures, and they don't let the failures define them. And the constant theme is the learning from the failure and then overcoming and then iterating and persevering and then coming out on top. Now, there's a variety of these stories. They each manifest in a different way. I'd say that one story that I would say would be the biggest, dichotomy between a very difficult upbringing and then the success that individual's achieved today. Love him or hate him, would be Grant Cardone. Grant Cardone had not a impoverished childhood, but he was trouble. He was into drugs. He was not, but the person who got like a Harvard MBA and then went on to build like a $1 billion company. But he overcame his own personal struggles. I think he had some family issues as well. And now he's a brand name. He's a known name. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So I would say in terms of from dealing with drugs in his early to mid 20s, I think there was even an arrest at one point, if I'm not mistaken, to becoming hundreds of millions of dollars in net worth. That's probably one of the greatest stories. But I don't want to discount anybody else because everybody else has a story similar to that. They just probably aren't worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but by any definition, they're very successful. So that's something that I've noticed again and again.
I think you have been able to have that privileged position of being able to see it's kind of the aggregate of all of your guests and see those common themes, which is so good that you shared that with us. And I agree, Grant Cardone is kind of a love him or hate him guy. But definitely, he's got some good things to say.
I was going to remind our viewers and listeners that if they're not following on LinkedIn to follow your content. I know you and I have been connected for quite some time. I always appreciate the terrific, engaging content that you put out there. And one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you was focusing around, I guess, well referred to as modern approaches to sales or modern approach to leadership, namely around where empathy fits in. When we look at old, quote unquote, old school sales tactics, it's not really relational. It's much more transactional. Treating most people as objects towards an approach where we're seeing more common today. Especially with I suppose younger generations as well, amongst an approach by leading with empathy. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit more in terms of where empathy fits in from a sales and leadership perspective.
Sure. So empathy has to be at the core of a sales and leadership. And it's not just a nice to have, it's a need to have. And the reason why it's a need to have versus a nice to have is because if you're leading a team or if you're selling a product, you have to understand that we are closer and more connected than ever before as business units, as organizations, between customers and suppliers, between team members and leaders. And the ability to see the other, to see what else is out there in terms of shopping for new products, or, for example, even shopping around for new companies to go work at. It's in your face all the time and it's easily accessible. The barriers to switch jobs, to switch providers has never been lower. Right now, we can almost most people can now work virtually. Most people in any sort of like knowledge job can now work virtually, which means that they can go apply anywhere in the world. Customers now do 70% of their research on their own before purchasing a product from a company. So that being said, because information is out there, access is available. If you aren't leading with empathy, and by empathy, leading by empathy or selling with empathy, it means that you'll have the employee-centric view or the customer-centric view. You are focusing on what the needs of the employee is or the customer is, and that's what's driving your decisions. That's what's driving everything that you do in your day-to-day. And if you don't lead with that, and if you don't have that, then you're going to find out very quickly that the old school way of, for example, top-down management, where you're just telling people to do more, or, for example, the old school sales methodology, where you're trying to almost like con somebody into purchasing a product, isn't going to work anymore because people have access to information. And with access to information means that you have to up your game. You have to up your game in every aspect of your business. And it's not hard to do. It just means that you have to be aware of that, be cognizant of it, and just be better. So I think that that's something that a lot of, I guess, legacy business leaders or even sales leaders have trouble with. And, that's something that I think the pandemic has really shone a light on. Who can lead with empathy? Who can lead with an employee first view or a customer first view? Those are the people that have won throughout the pandemic. Those are the people that migrated their workforce from in office to remote successfully, and everybody maintained their productivity. Everybody was happy working remote, and everything was it was difficult, but there was still progress versus, for example, a leader who wasn't able to lead with empathy and who didn't have the trust and support of her employees. And because of that, when people went remote, they just slacked off or they didn't feel like they wanted to contribute anymore. Same with selling to customers. Now you have customers that are losing money. They're losing their own customers and they have to find budget for your product or service. If you are still trying to push a product or service down that customer's throat, you're not going to be very successful when, for example, they've just let half of their own staff or their own workforce go. So being aware of the driving motivators of the employee, of the customer, that's how you win. And I think that, like I said, like the pandemic really exposed us that was a necessity and a requirement, not just a nice to have, but like I said, a need to have.
That's sensational insight, Scott. And I guess it's loosely related, but a lot of entrepreneurs and people, whether it be solopreneurs or people who are growing a business, we're talking with them, and we're not salespeople, but in various groups that we chat with people, one sort of a common problem I hear about is people struggling to build predictable revenue through their sales. In your mind, is there a certain approach in terms of how you go about building predictable revenue? I know I've asked that question before, and I think someone said, well, to get predictable revenue, you have to have predictable leads. What's your take on that? How can like you said, an entrepreneur or a smaller organization go about building predictable revenue?
When you want to build predictable revenue, I think the best way to do it is to model after Mark Roberge and the HubSpot model, the content marketing model, and the demand generation model that's focused on creating or positioning your business as an authority or the subject matter expert in a certain field with a certain product. And HubSpot did this the best, and this is why I reference them. A lot of other companies have sort of followed HubSpot's model, but HubSpot was a content creation machine. They were putting out content all the time, answering the questions that their buyers had. And by doing that, they created an inbound demand generation machine. And Mark Roberge was one of their first employees, was their CRO that sort of championed this model. And by creating that inbound demand generation machine, I don't have the statistics or the percentages, but the majority of the revenue wasn't built through an outbound sales process. So I think that by building this content creation, demand generation machine, that's how you have a predictable inbound flow of leads. But also, if you do want to have some sort of outbound initiative, which still works, it's obviously a lot nicer to have, the predictable revenue coming in through all of your inbound leads. But if you want to go outbound, imagine the authority that you've built by creating all of this content, by creating a predictable inbound machine so that when a rep, an SDR, goes outbound and calls somebody, that person's already heard about your company. So it's already created a much warmer environment for that outbound. So I think that by focusing on creating content around your brand, again, a good content creation strategy is about answering the questions that the buyers have. By doing that, you're going to have that predictable revenue. And there's other pieces as well. Like you have to know your ideal customer profiles, your buyer personas, and all that kind of stuff. But once you figure that out, you have that predictable revenue inbound, and then it also sort of doubles down and reinforces your outbound. And I think that the reason why I highlight that is because if an entrepreneur is going to market and selling a product and they go pure outbound and that's it can work, but it's hard and it's not predictable. And also, if you're selling a one-time or non-recurring charge service versus a monthly recurring service, you eat what you kill, and after that project's done, you're on to the next one. So it's even more difficult if you have this sort of service or project-based product or even a hardware product and not like a SaaS recurring revenue product, and you are only going outbound. So I think you just have to set yourself up for the success and know that you should focus on developing demand from day one.
That's an awesome mini masterclass answer right there, Scott. That was amazing.
You're very kind. No, it's.
I love that answer. That was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Yeah, great. Christian, I'll hand the reins back to you there.
For sure. So I'm going to continue on this thread, and I'm learning, taking notes as you're talking here.
Sure.
But Scott, so you have ROI Overload and ROI Overload Academy. So I can tell you just my understanding of it. It seems like it is educational content for sales and marketing. Is it? Maybe you could tell us really what the essence of it is. Is it a system, or is it just a list of resources that you can access on demand? How does it work?
Sure. You're very kind to plug everything I'm working on. Totally not necessary, and like super grateful. So I guess I have a job. So right now I currently lead sales and marketing for an innovation unit within Grass Valley, which is about a 6-year-old company. I got that job because the company that I was working for before that was acquired by Grass Valley. That's my 9 to 5, and I focus on sales and marketing strategy and a lot of the stuff that we just spoke about. Outside of that, I do the podcast, which is also focused on very similar stream as to what I do in my job. Outside of that, the podcast and my job, I also have a brand called ROI Overload, and that brand is comprised of a newsletter, which is just something that I write. Again, sales and marketing strategy. So you see that I sort of eat my own dog food. I create the content that speaks to the people that I want to interact with, and that's sort of the long-term play, building my own brand and my own name. So I have the newsletter under the ROI Overload brand. I have a Medium publication where other sales and marketing leaders can contribute their own pieces to that publication. Still same stream. The Academy is something I'm actually building out, and I haven't quite figured out exactly how I want to position it. But at the end of the day, what I want it to be is a dedicated resource of classes for entrepreneurs looking to build a business. And don't get me wrong, the second you hear that, you're going to say there's a lot of that stuff out there, and everybody who would say that would be correct. So the reason why it's not finished yet is I want to make it so that the content is so exceptional that it provides that much value if I'm going to monetize it, which right now, if you try and get anything on it, you can't, because it's not actually open to the public yet. But that end goal would be to have some sort of academy or resource, or perhaps even courses contributed by other leaders in sales, marketing, building business, whatever it may be. And people can go there. And the way I think I'm going to monetize it is some sort of subscription model. So a monthly access fee that gives you access to, say, like 2,000 videos, and you can segment them into whatever you want to learn about. And it's really meant to give quality business building, entrepreneurship, startup information. I think the one thing that I really want to focus on is quality sales information, because there's a lot of old school sales methodologies and tactics that are frankly like garbage. There's a lot of great marketing information out there, but how you sell in 2021, I don't see a lot of people doing that properly. I still see, what you mentioned, that old school sales methodology. So I want to create a resource where marketers or entrepreneurs can go to find out how to market their brand, but have that congruence across their marketing and their sales, so that they can build and create that repeatable revenue pipeline, and not just focus on that pure outbound, old school, cold calling, dialing for dollars sales methodology. So that's really what I want to focus on. It's sort of a work in progress, because, working a job, running a podcast, writing a newsletter once a week, obviously it's very time consuming, but that's sort of the end goal, to have all of these different assets that are associated with my name, my brand, that, sort of just are extensions of what I've learned over my career. And that's what I want to give back to the startup community, the entrepreneurial community, and just people who want to just learn more about building businesses, because I love doing it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we are keenly interested in the subjects that you're bringing to the table here. So, yeah, I mean, maybe it is kind of, your ability to talk about what you do, but we're also learning and taking notes here. So I maybe, I have a more of a tactical question for you, and it may be an old school question here. So you've done such a great job of talking about this strategy, right? The empathy and, the demand generation and warming up the cold audience for some outbound, if you want to do that as well. What about in terms of the tactics? So you'll see a lot of marketing and salespeople, advertising like agencies advertising that they do, SEO, pay-per-click, paid ads, all that kind of stuff,
Everything.
social media marketing, blah, blah, blah. Can you tell us kind of, your preferred tactics amongst those? How do you see that kind of batch of those traditional methods that people are still using effectively?
So yes, you're correct. So I think that there are a large variety of different marketing methods. And if you're going to start a business, I think that you should be testing everything. I think there's base requirements, like minimum requirements you have to have in every single category. So for example, you need your social media profiles. You need your website. I would focus on writing a blog once a week. That, writing a blog once a week by definition is SEO. You are creating content. You know your keywords that your audience is interested in. You're answering questions that your audience would be asking you in a blog once a week. Google's going to index that. There's a, not a great SEO strategy, but it's a start of an SEO strategy. You have content creation. So you're putting up posts on social. You're making some video clips, a great content creation strategy. I think a variety of people have sort of spoken about this, but what you can do is you can record a podcast like this. You can break it into, 5 to 10 minute or even less, 2 to 5 minute clips. You throw those clips on LinkedIn, on Facebook. You break it down even further. You can put those on Twitter. You can break it down into 60 or 30 second sound bites. You can put those on Reels, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Snapchat Spotlight. So you have a content creation strategy. So that's like the basics in terms of where you should fall when you're first marketing a brand. So you have some content on your website, which turns out to be SEO. You have some content on social, which turns out to be like a content or social marketing strategy. Outside of that, then I would say you'd want to look for your niche outlets where your audience could be hanging out. So when I sell a SaaS product, I'm on Product Hunt. I'm on Hacker News. I'm trying to find different communities that would love to test out a brand new SaaS product. So those are the types of things that you'd have to find out for your particular product. For example, you're working, your podcast is about cybersecurity. If you're selling any sort of IT services, where are the forums where your community's hanging out, where your evangelists could hang out if they love what you do? Go find those as well. And then at that point, now you have your content strategy, you have your social strategy, you have some other sort of niche type pieces of marketing collateral that you're putting out or that you're putting into the world. And then I would say you start testing. And by the way, another thing you mentioned is paid ads. I actually wouldn't even bother doing paid ads until you figured out who is going to be buying your product, because to use paid ads to test out your audience is expensive. You can do that with content. You can do that with finding niche groups. You can do that with seeing who is, for example, coming to your website and converting and maybe entering their email after they've read your blog, whatever that may be. I would try all the free options first, and there's a few out there. And then after that, once you figured out what works, then you can try and run some paid ads. Maybe you can see if you can you drive in some extra traffic against the people that you've identified could be your customer profiles or your buyer personas based on who's already purchased your product. But also you just want to, you test out all these different channels and then you double down on what works. That's really it. There's no one size fits all. If you want a really good resource on how to build a product from scratch, go on YouTube and type in Noah Kagan first 1,000 customers. Noah Kagan is the founder of AppSumo, amongst a variety of other products and brands. And he speaks about how he markets to his first 1,000 customers. So for his first 100 customers, first 500 customers, first 1,000 customers. And a lot of it is just testing and then doubling down on what works. But when you first start out, you just do everything. You do absolutely everything. And then you'll start to notice some trends. You'll start to notice that some channels work better than others. And that's what you sort of double down on. And then After you double down on that and you get to say your first 50 sales, your first 50 customers, whatever, then you try that whole process again, because now your service could have matured, your website could have matured, your product could have matured, so that some of those channels that didn't work for 0 to 50 customers could work from 50 to 100 customers. So a lot of it is, this is not new, but iterating, testing, A/B testing, whatever that may be. It's just not just with an ad set, it's across all of your marketing activities. And then when you find something that works really well, you just keep going down and doubling down on that until you feel like you have the resources to try new channels. But I think what a lot of people do is they try and be excellent everywhere, and they end up being excellent nowhere because they're just spreading themselves too thin. And if they're a bootstrapped business and you're trying to go across every single channel, you're just going to run out of resources, or you're just going to, you personally are going to just be absolutely just way maxed out on your bandwidth. You're going to be stressed out. It's not going to work well. So I would say you can build your first 50 customers, your first 100 customers just off one channel. Just find out what that channel is, and then abuse that channel as much as you possibly can.
I feel like you didn't hold back on us there. You laid out a little bit of a mini course for us, and I hope you do create a course out of based on that story you just told there.
People want like a magic bullet, and they don't.
Yeah.
And they don't get a magic bullet, so they just try everything, and they keep trying everything. But if they really just looked at what they were doing, and they will start to notice trends in, for example, even amongst social. I notice which social channels work better for me than others. I'll give you an example. I've started doubling down more on Twitter because I notice when I look at my conversions, I actually get more traffic from Twitter, even though I have one of the smallest audiences on Twitter. I have about 25,000 followers on Twitter, which relative to everything else is small. But for some reason, the content on Twitter drives conversions. I get more, my KPI is newsletter signups. I get more newsletter signups on Twitter than I do on LinkedIn, which has an audience that's 4x as large as Twitter. So yes, am I still going to post content on LinkedIn? Of course. But what I'm really trying to figure out is, how do I do really well on Twitter? How do I create content that's shareable, that's retweetable? Because that's driving most of my traffic right now. Now, maybe that's not going to be the end all strategy, and I have to reevaluate in a month or 2 months. But that's something that you just have to be cognizant of, and just look at the numbers, and then figure out and learn from. I guess one more point I'll make on that is, if you want to learn how to do a particular channel very well, because you notice that your first effort is yielding some results, just study people that have done it before. Like, I have people that I look at. So Matthew Kobach for Twitter is somebody that I look at for great Twitter content. For LinkedIn, I look at Justin Welsh for some of his his LinkedIn content. There's a marketer, I can't remember her last name, but her first name is Mary, and I can't remember her last name, but she puts out a whole bunch of stuff. She's built a great community on Facebook, if you want to really build a Facebook following. If I look to content writing and blogging, I look towards Seth Godin. Seth Godin is the person I try and study and figure out how to write like Seth Godin. So you just figure out what works, and then you study the experts in that particular field and learn from them. And it's not like, when you say it sounds obvious, but common sense isn't common. And that's really all you have to do.
I can honestly say that you just came in here and absolutely smashed one out of the park. Like, that was a hell of an episode. Like, I know this is one Christian and I are going to be talking for many, many months to come. Like that, you absolutely crushed it. We're so grateful you came and joined us today. You were a rock star. Thank you very much.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. Well, I'm happy I was here. I hope you got everything you wanted. And I know it was a shorter one. It was only about like 25 minutes, but that was really fun. It was a lot of fun. That's normally what we aim for. Okay. So we try to. That's my attention span. So, Krish and I, we'll take a brief pause here, and then we'll be right back to wrap up today's episode. Well, that was some mind-blowing awesomeness there. Scott really, really brought, and as I mentioned in the episode there, I thought it was a mini masterclass on sales and marketing there. Dying to know what one of your key takeaways was from that conversation.
For sure. Really, our show time slots really didn't do justice to what Scott was delivering today. I wish we could have gone on for another at least 30 minutes there. Really, the whole idea of not going to the old school way of approaching sales and marketing, and the idea of creating demand through content generation and creating that demand generation machine, like the HubSpot model that he mentioned there. I think that is a really good illustration of how, us and others listening can really model their business development efforts after.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Christian. Again, it was a brilliant conversation. Scott just had so many gems. I'm going to have to re-listen to it probably a dozen times to get all the good notes from that. But I loved how he was talking about empathy in sales, empathy in leadership. He really, I think, epitomizes modern sales, and definitely someone worth following and learning from. And again, we come to that point of the show where I always want to make sure we extend a special thanks to our loyal listeners and viewers for carving out a special time out of their week to spend some time with us. Thank you, as always, for supporting the podcast. I do want to make sure that I remind everyone to check out previous episodes of the Cybersecurity Matters podcast on our YouTube page, as well as on your preferred podcasting platform. But until next time, be well, be safe, and we'll catch you next time on the Cybersecurity Matters podcast.